Right, so welcome back to Red from the Rafters with Judith Slays. We're back to bring you yet another in a long string, unfortunately very, very long, too long string of special episodes dedicated to the ongoing crisis of abuse, harassment, and once again grooming in the comic book industry. And so we thought we'd sit down and talk it out yet again, like we've done a few times, right? We've attempted the, kind of probably yelling at the camera. We've probably done that before. I do not quite recall, but we've been at this for 2 years almost, and with varying degrees of success and production qualities. So you'll forgive us if we get a little bit of a Groundhog Day induced amnesia on this one, right? But we've definitely in the past attempted to do the bedtime story, read you an angry Andrea Dworkin speech attempt at it. We've done the Lois Lane news presenter attempt at the same subject. Complete with charts, right? And a whiteboard and some handy questions to ask around about that probably no one asked around about, but it's okay, right? You try and try again, and maybe one day it'll break through, right? Because it's quite entrenched, and that's quite the big problem. But as it happens, right, we may be on the precipice of some change, or an opportunity for an inflection point of the likes that we've just not encountered before, right? Because quite unfortunately, two large names in the industry, Warren Ellis and Cameron Stewart, have amassed quite a few accusers between them of varying activities between the two. But for Mr. Stewart, there's quite a number of young ladies that he is said to have manipulated and groomed, and some of them started when they were underage. It was well known, apparently, within his studio and his contemporaries, that he was up to these kinds of things and putting on a fake English accent to try to seduce women in a very sort of How I Met Your Mother kind of a thing. And so for us, we're quite insulted by all of it, but quite personally insulted by misusing fake English accents, right? Of course, we do Glasgow, but still, it's the United Kingdom. Don't abuse fake accents, right? Use them for fun, use them recreationally, use them for profit, right? Or whatever it is that you call profits that we get from this now. But point is, for fun, for profit, not for manipulating, misleading people, right? Particularly not if you're allegedly, in the practice of grooming underage girls, right? Not underage women, no such thing. Underage girls, don't do that, right? Please don't, in any accent, whether it's your natural one or not, just don't do it, right? So that's quite catastrophic, and has left a gigantic mess in its wake. And so we're going to do like a recap for the long time viewers of the what we used to call the radiation model of the fallout of abuse and harassment in the industry when these things get exposed, right? And one of those rings of people who bear the consequences of an abuser, harasser, groomer's behavior is, of course, their colleagues, right? Who, most of the time are not aware of this person's behavior, right? And so there's a particularly striking set of dynamics when it comes to Cameron Stewart and the allegations against him, right? Because he poof disappeared as far as the public knows. Locked down his Instagram, locked down Twitter, did not make public statements. Apparently reached out to at least one of his accusers with your typical kind of line of sorry, sort of. We won't get into details, don't need to. Point is, no real public statements, and just kind of disappeared as soon as he surfaced. And that is even more problematic than usual, because what he left behind was a co-writer who has had the coronavirus for weeks, like one of those extended cases that you hear of where they go up and down like a roller coaster. So this poor lad had to drag himself out of bed or something, right? In the midst of having what people have in this pandemic, and has to come out and publicly say, you know, how it is that he feels about finding out that his co-creator was, you know, manipulating girls and young women, many of them for a long time, in deeply inappropriate ways, when the two of them had been working on a series that was aimed at young girls, you know, and teens and tweens, right? And another one that probably may appeal to them, right? But their parents may not be in love with all the heads exploding periodically in Mortal Crush, but definitely Batgirl fans, right? So that's quite terrible, to leave your co-worker with that virus, to have to deal with your mess when you run away, right? Marie Kondo would not approve of that behavior. But also his former Batgirl editor at DC, you know, him and his boyfriend, if we understand correctly, have both tested positive. We don't know, we do not recall whether they're symptomatic or not, but this was quite soon before the revelations about Mr. Stewart came to light. So you can imagine how painful and traumatic that is to have to go through, on top of realizing you've got to quarantine yourself with your significant other because you're both positive for a highly dangerous virus that is circling the entire globe like 8 times over, whatever it is now. So you can see, right, how the selfish behavior of number one, exposing your colleagues to the liabilities involved if a series gets cancelled or whatever, but also number two, that you could leave them in the lurch and expose them to liability in the face of something so scary and life-threatening and life-changing, right? Because this could, you know, having this virus could have long-term health effects for anybody that's got it. But so this is not the kind of thing that you should have to deal with ever, right? But particularly now, you know, it shows a startling level of selfishness and self-involvedness to be like, oh, you know, in the midst of all of this, maybe it would be a good thing to stand and you know, and take the shot, right? And be a man, be an adult, you know, of any gender, just be a responsible human being, and take responsibility for your decades, clearly, of actions, right? But no, fly away in the midst of a pandemic when some of the people you've directly affected with this behavior are dealing with it, right? So, not cool. And if you recall correctly, one of the last drawings that the lad posted on his Instagram account was David Lynch saying, "Fix your heart," right? And so, irony, it's great, you know. Perhaps it was meant to be self-reflective, right? But perhaps every single panel of Fight Club True that he drew was supposed to be self-reflective, but he wasn't getting the message. Right? So who knows? Like, who knows what goes on in the heads of these lads? No, we're gonna leave it there at that with him, right? And as far as Mr. Ellis, the once and future in a different context, the once and future internet Jesus, right? As of last count that we saw, there's 60 different people with various allegations that we don't quite know what they are. Mr. Ellis has come forward to say that he never understood that he had power over people, right? That he could exploit in bad ways, and he said that he's not assaulted anyone. So far as we know, none of the specific allegations so far include assault, so could be, you know, here's the truth, here's a lie, right? And we don't want to get too deep in the weeds on the specifics of all this because other people have done it quite well. You'll notice that we don't want to name any of the survivors, victims, however it is that they choose to identify themselves in that framework, because this video is going to be geared like a lot of rating video, non-fiction oriented coverage of these types of things are. It's meant to last, right? We want you to come back to this and review certain parts of it, so you can come back and say, okay, right, we learned this lesson. This particular frame is useful, right? So we don't particularly need or want 6 months down the road, a year down the road, a bunch of people feeling re-traumatized because their second cousin watched this video and said, oh, hey, we didn't know that such and such and such was right, or their name starts trending again on social media, or whatever it is. We don't want people re-exposed and re-traumatized, right? And the problem is, of course, is that even if the names of these perpetrators come up later on, boom, re-traumatizing parade. And this is extremely true for us in this particular moment, because of our peripheral association, shall we say, third-hand association with somebody that was outed a couple of years ago for this type of behavior. And some of what the allegations around one of the new people to be reported on overlapped in that period, right? And so when you hear this person did that, and you recall that that person was around when this person also did a thing that you heard about, and it brings it all flooding back in ways that no one wants to deal with, right? It's re-traumatizing, right? And it's quite easy, we think, if you're not in that first tier range, if you are not directly physically harmed or manipulated or whatever, if you're not one of the people who's a victim or a survivor of that individual, then you might think, well, of course not. You're not traumatized, right? Not me, not us, right? But the problem is, it's not necessarily true, because when you find yourself eating things that you told yourself you're going to stop eating because they're not for you, but they give you that, that kick, right? When you start drinking alcohol again, when you've not done so for weeks, or you drink more than you have in weeks, and you start to think, oh no, this set of compulsive behaviors that we're suddenly engaging in is a bit of a warning sign that we've got a bit of trauma, right, related to all of this. So I try to be, reflective and sensitive to the fact that if we keep this as general, right, as possible, then hopefully disseminating it in the future, watching it again, coming back to the frame that we discuss, they don't dare see too many of these things up, right? Because you want to create resources to learn lessons from this, to prevent things in the future, right? And to make sure that people understand that what is that they're feeling in the wake of getting tied up in all of this in one way or another is okay, right? And so you try to straddle that line, and it's quite difficult to do, right? And before we get onto the frame, right, which we may in the future cut into its own thing, right, so that none of this discussion of the specific people reaches it. So again, people don't, you lower your incidences of re-traumatization and whatnot. But to get back to that outer level, like second or third outer level, it's a bit non-Euclidean, right? Because it's not that clean the way all of this stuff works. But when you get to the contemporaries, right, the professional circles that get mucked up by all of this, in Warren Ellis's case, this could have been far worse than it was, right? Because number one, he was supposed to have an imprint at what publisher we don't know, because he did not say, and we don't think anybody came forward to say they were about to give him an imprint, and they did not, and we don't know why that is, although there may be some hovering questions around all of that now, right? If maybe somebody got wind of something before all this broke, before the proverbial dam broke, nobody knows. But suffice to say, Ellis was going to get his own imprint at a publisher, and it fell through, right? And it's tough to know, because he has bounced around to various places over the years. Could be that Marvel made a bid for him, right, because they lost Bendis, and Bendis has the whole Jinx world. Or it could have been DC, right, because the Wildstorm and all of that worked out quite well, even though it had stalled. So perhaps they're organizing to create a Warren Ellis version of that, right? Or it could have been Dark Horse. It could have been any number of, if it was Dark Horse and somebody warned them about, the allegations, they would not have cared, because so far as we know, Dark Horse has not issued any statements about Cameron Stewart and Fight Club 3 and what his future at that company may be when DC has already said they've cut ties. Dark Horse, bad history of this kind of stuff, right? Very bad history of this kind of stuff. And they just don't seem to institutionally care at any level at all. It's awful, right? So we don't muck about with those comics. But so we don't know where it is that Ellis got this imprint, but if there was a Warren Ellis imprint, and then boom, this hits, right? Because his whole T-Rex Batman story in Scott Snyder's follow-up to Dark Knight's Metal, it's called Heavy Metal or something, cannot quite recall, or Death Metal, one of the two. Anyway, he was going to do this one short little story about a evil Batman who is also a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So quite Warren Ellis would have been quite a lovely story, but of course, under the circumstances, they cut him from that project, right? And it's fascinating to notice if you look at who the creative team was that replaced him and who is behind that series at DC. And so it's interesting to note who within that company moves fast in these situations. Just worth, doing some math if you want to see who is on top of this stuff. We don't know the future of the Batman's grave with Brian Hitch, yet we do not recall whether it's been resolicited since distribution stopped during the pandemic, so it may just quietly go away. But if it continues, that will also give you a fascinating view into what parts of DC deal with what, how seriously, right? Maybe worth tracking for the future. You never know. Right, so if that imprint had existed, right, and it imploded because of the things that Warren Ellis was now associated with, who knows, an imprint could have been 6 different books, right? And if they're all written by him, that would have been 6 different artistic teams that went to hell, right? And it could have been, he was curating other writers to do different things within this. And if that was true, then they all would have had their gaze collapse under them, or there would have had to be a reshuffling, a renaming, and all of this and all of their shite put in limbo until they could figure it out, right? So the bigger you get as a name, the more people you put at risk with histories of this sort of behavior, which is one of like 18 million different reasons not to do that. But this is why it's relevant to the industry. This is why your history is relevant to the people that work with you, because you can put them at risk of losing jobs and losing significant amounts of money, right? And again, we're not going to go too deep into naming names on all of this, right? But Wildcats stalled out, right? And 2 or 3 different people said it was their fault for being late. So, great consummate professionals not pointing fingers at each other and all, taking whatever they thought the blame was on it, right? But if you look at the history of that creative team and you read back a little bit further into what they were doing before Wildcats, you'll notice that some of the members of the Wildcats team also lost work when Border Town was cancelled, right? And Border Town was cancelled because of another abuser being outed, right? And he was gotten rid of quite quickly, thankfully, partially because he just did not have the pull in the industry to try to cling on, right? Didn't have the pull, and also apparently they decided to take it seriously that time, and it was create your own vertigo. So maybe the other teams had a bit more leverage in saying, no, you're done and we're done. We don't know, but things happen the way they should have there, right? And that experience had long-term impacts on the mental health and the productivity of some of the members of that team that went on to Wildcats. So it's not hard to extrapolate, right, that perhaps some of the mental and emotional fallout, right, from losing Border Town contributed to Wildcats not making it across the line. Do you see what we're saying, right? And it's not to say this person or that person went through this or that, but it gives you the perspective to say people are being harmed and potentially traumatized by this in many different ways. And just because it is not the severity, right, of being the person who got groped or bitten or assaulted or groomed, whatever the gruesome specifics of the incident may be, right, just because you're on the outer perimeter of it doesn't mean that your pain is not, number one, valid, and number two, could cause massive professional repercussions for you that you just do not deserve to undergo, right? So that's what we like to think about all this, because because you always see like, oh, what is it that we do about all the comics on our shelf that was written or drawn or lettered or whatever by this person who is now known to be doing things that you find abhorrent, right? And those conversations, sure, maybe step back and have them offline with your friends, with your gran, with your teddy bears and whatnot. Maybe don't take up too much public space with that, because it's not quite all that relevant, right? And it is interesting to see more creators, probably a lot of artists, but also writers and whatnot, coming out and saying on social media and stuff like, hello, if you have an abusive history, please do not sign up to work on my titles, because I do not want to be a party to your mess, and number two, I do not want a project to get blown up in my face, right, and lose however much money and months or years of work to a project that you can never talk about again. Like, it's nice that men are more willing to grasp the personal, professional consequences of having a grenade go off right in your fucking ear, right? But right, and so it's nice to see that there's a grasp of consequences, because if there's a grasp of consequences, oh no, this might affect us in a very bad way too, then you might be open your ears more, right? Look around more, cultivate closer professional associations, right? Maybe work with women instead. Not that there aren't female abusers or abusers of all genders, they certainly exist, but maybe looking to people outside the straight white men who disproportionately do the most of the predatoring in the industry. Just a thought, right? So there's strategies and things that support the long-term goals of interventions into abuse and harassment in the industry, that this kind of cisgender heterosexual male self-reflection may provoke, inspire, produce, but at the same time, please recognize the degrees of difference between, oh no, is my favorite creator someone who does things that mean that I have to throw their work in a bonfire next week, right? Or, oh no, is this a guy that's going to get our book cancelled, right? Versus, oh no, is this guy likely to assault me or my friends, or if I bring my niece into comics, he's going to try to groom her, right? Like, there's a scale, right? And that's why we like the radiation frame, right? And why we like looking at it like a Geiger counter, because there's a spectrum of harm that gets done, and all of it is harm, and all of it is valid to express the pain around being subjected to that harm. But bear in mind where along the spectrum you're falling into this when you're making public statements about it. Especially if you have a larger than small public profile, right? Like, do you have over 100,000 followers? Are you very peripherally involved in all of this? If the answer to both of those questions is 2, maybe minimize your original content creation in this vein, and perhaps focus on retweeting the people who were closer to the epicenter of the incident, right? So that's what we're going to say about that part. So the radiation frame. What is the radiation frame? So HBO released quite a nice dramatic fictionalized series about what it is that happened at Chernobyl. So you're probably thinking, oh, you know, Judith only talks about the radiation frame because she watched the HBO series of Chernobyl, and it's the most brilliant look at institutions and structures in fictional television since The Wire. So of course she's going to apply that frame. And you got us, right? You certainly got us on that one. Got us dead to rights. That's precisely why we're doing it. But that doesn't mean it's wrong, right? But the whole thing, right, is, as we said before, we would hope that this particular round, right, and the specifics of these two particular high-profile individuals who stand accused is viewed the same way that Chernobyl was, right? Because it exposed flaws and problems in the Soviet system and its corruption in ways. Of course, it was a terrible event, and we still have no idea how many people died from it, and we'll get to that bit. But the consequences, right, were that the Soviet Union, that the party, right, that the entire apparatus could not conceal the extent of the rot and the corruption in the system, right? And it cracked something fundamental in the Soviet Union that led it directly on the path to Glasnost, the Berlin Wall coming down, that Scorpion song that the CIA probably did not write, so on and so forth, right? And here we are in the post-Cold War world. And so that kind of broke the back of the Soviet Union because of the scope of the catastrophe and all of the problems that it bared to the world in ways that could no longer be hidden. And we would like to think this could be the same way, particularly when you've reached a scale of 60 plus people, and it involves Warren Ellis, right? And it involves the his particular form of influence and influence peddling, one would say, in the industry, and his larger than life cult of personality, right? Because if this man that was so influential, right, that shaped so many careers, did this type of manipulation, and we can look further down the chain of the people who took his messages in, took his mannerisms in, but also replicated the same kinds of harm that he did in many ways. And of course, Brian Wood is one of those people, although what he did is not precisely the same so far as we know Ellis was up to. But if you've got all these predators in the same pool, right, and they are in the same pool, right, when you talk about social circles, professional circles, overlapping readerships, and all of these kinds of things, then your likelihood to get snagged by one and not get ratted out by the other increases, right? Because let's say, for example, Ellis really did not understand the degree to which his behavior was heinous, then he would not necessarily be able to recognize it in someone else, right? You don't know. These things work out different ways, but there's a clear culture problem, right? Because you cannot disentangle what Ellis was up to from the culture, right, that he propagated in comics and the way that he used the internet and his public persona to do it. You can't disentangle these things, right? You cannot narrow the Warren Ellis problem to an individual, to a series of interpersonal events. You cannot. This is systemic. This shows the structure. This shows how these attitudes propagate, or at least, go unchecked, right? And so it's no longer, this person who we barely knew who they were, was abusive to someone in this period of their life, or at a convention, or someone who happens to be a right-wing provocateur, right? And so has no cultural cachet with the rest of the industry, so he's quite easy for large segments of the industry to just say, okay, great, this guy sucked, he had a history of credit card fraud when he was a bartender or something, so obviously bad apple, let's get rid of him, right? This is not a bad apple. This is at the very least a bad tree, if not in fact a bad orchard, right? This is a Monsanto level problem when we talk about Mr. Ellis, right? And so that's why we want to use the Chernobyl metaphor beyond the radiation frame to set the terms of the discourse and where it is that we go from there.